we serve from that is evil, and strengthen our unity for the welfare of the city. Amen.
Amen.
Acknowledgement to country. I would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as the traditional custodians of the land that we meet upon today, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and future, for they hold the memories, culture, tradition and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that contribute to our community. Thank you. Again, I need to remind people that this council meeting is being webcast and recorded. By speaking at the council meeting, you agree to being recorded and webcast. Please ensure that if and when you are speaking at this council meeting that you're respectful to other people and use appropriate language. AlburyCity accepts no liability for any defamatory or offensive remarks or gestures made during the course of this council meeting. An audio recording will be made for administrative purposes. Conflict of interest declarations. I've not been made aware of any. Mr. Zachnich.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This advice to the council meeting relates to the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. Section 10.4 requires a person submitting planning applications or submissions regarding a planning application to disclose any reportable political donation and or gifts to any local councillor or employee of council. Reportable political donations include those of or above $1,000. The disclosure statement forms are available on the council's website or from the Customer Service Centre and must be lodged in accordance with the Act. The forms are also available at the back of the chamber during meetings. In dealing with development applications, councillors need to take into account specific matters contained in the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979. Accordingly, the provisions of Section 4.151 of that Act are set out in the Council Officer's report detailing issues to be considered. The Local Government Act 1993, Section 375A requires that a division be called whenever a motion for a planning decision is put at a meeting of the council. Planning decision means a decision made in the exercise of a function of the council under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act, including a decision relating to a development application, an environmental planning instrument, a development control plan or a development contribution plan under that Act, but not including the making of an order under Division 9.3 of Part 9 of that Act. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Zachnich. I have a question from Councillor Doxey, or is it you moving the apologies? Yes, thank you. Apologies, CM4. Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the recommendation that Council receive, note and accept the apologies of Councillors Darren Cameron and Amanda Conn and grant leave of absence for the meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. There'll be no question or debate. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. There is no Merrill minute. Action plan, CM6. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Vandervan.
Happy to move that the following action plans be received and noted. 1, actions complete for noting only. 2, actions awaiting response from external parties. 3, actions in progress for long-term issues more than 3 months.
Thank you.
I do have some questions though, Mr
Thank
Mayor.
you. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan, did you wish to open debate or ask your questions first?
Just ask the questions to the relevant member of staff through you.
Yes.
The first one I want to talk about is the Albury Aquatics Facilities Reference Group. It says there that a further report to be presented to Council on conclusion of the EOI process, but there's no mention in there of the potential date for that conclusion of that process. Can we get some clarification of when that might finish, please? And we might expect a report to come to final.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Councillor Vandervan. The EOI process is in train at the moment, so I would expect if it's not late September, certainly early October at the latest.
Follow-up?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Just not a follow-up, but another question. The issue around the RMS and Swift Street crossing, I thought we had a fairly robust discussion about assisting the local traders by moving to a 1-hour parking in the vicinity of the proposed crossing. Is there any reason why that hasn't happened? I know that there was some talk about a CBD parking strategy, but I'm not sure whether that's going to interfere with providing some, some work for going forward so that we have that 1-hour parking in Swift Street instead of 2-hour parking.
Mr Ferris.
Yeah, through you, Mr Mayor, that will form part of the CBD parking strategy, which will come to council in September or October.
Thank you. So no chance of altering that parking timing before then?
Mr Ferris.
Through you, Mr Mayor, certainly our preference would be to do it as a integrated holistically across the CBD so that we can market that and promote it across the city where the changes are, but certainly we can bring that forward and have a look at bringing that forward if you like.
Well, then, if that's the case, then can we have some timelines around when we might expect to see the development of the project scope and the concept designs for the proper pedestrian crossing, rather than having an open-ended item in our actions plans?
Mr Ferris.
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, certainly we can put some timeframes around that for.
Thank you. Did you wish
Again-
to speak to that, or have you another question?
No, some further questions. The
Yep.
Notice of motion around the investigation into improved disability access and inclusion in Albury. When might there be a timeline? It says there no later than October 28, but we seem to be pushing a lot of these things back a bit. Is there any reason why that can't be brought forward?
Ms Squire. Mr Zachnich.
That was the date requested in the motion, endorsed by the council, Mr Mayor. Yeah.
Councillor
There's
Vanderman.
there's a few other items in there around some actions. Is there a chance that we can go through these action plans and actually put some timings against these action plans, like the Notice of Urgent Business construction bond, investigation on options? Can we have some timelines around when we might expect to have some answers regarding what our options might be?
Certainly can. We'll bring that back.
I don't wish to speak to open any debate. Reserve right of reply.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchby, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to the relevant member of staff. Further to this issue of action plans, which either don't seem to have an end point or disappear. For quite some time, we were looking into different ways of heating and cooling large council-owned public buildings like Lauren Jackson Sports Stadium with things like desiccated air heating and cooling, and that particular item disappeared off this list in February or March of this year with the proviso that the CSIRO would get back to us with some further information. So I'm just asking if we have heard back from the CSIRO regarding this issue.
Mr Zachnich.
Thanks for the question. No, we haven't. That's why we haven't come back to you, but we'll certainly follow that up.
Thank you, Mr Zachnich. I'll reiterate Councillor Vanderman's concerns. There are a few open-ended items here that really need some timelines and some action, so if that can be enabled, that'd be fantastic. Okay, with that being said, I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM7, confirmation of minutes of the previous meeting. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the minutes of the council meeting held on Monday, 12th of August 2019 at 6 p.m. be confirmed.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that?
No, thank you.
Thank you. No question or debate. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. We have reports from community forums. There are none. We have notices of motion. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to move that council invite tenders from suitably qualified and experienced architectural firms to prepare a feasibility study for the development of a high-level IVA International Museum of Flight in or about an area covered by Bell Bridges, the laneway between Bell Bridges and the Library Museum and the Retro Cafe, and specifically but not exclusively including the following: urban site analysis, design narrative, concept floor plan, section diagram, exploded axonometric diagram if required, design references, images, ×2 hero renders, schedule of areas and interface between the existing Library Museum and the northern boundary of the proposed museum. The budget may be anticipated to be in the region of $15,500. There will be minimal or absolutely no loss of the grass area of QE2 Square in any design, and the Retro Cafe may require relocation within the museum if necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
Second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Stutchbury, you have the floor. I have a question. Do you wish me to take the question before you open debate?
Yep, that's fine.
Councillor Vanderman, question.
Thank you, through you to Councillor Stutchbury. Just interested in why the motion was changed to the original notice of motion that you anticipated was that Peddle-Thorpe architects be invited to prepare a feasibility study. Can I get some explanation as to why that was changed to this particular wording?
Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Van der Ven. I had the same question asked of me earlier today via email from Councillor Thurley, and I'm quite happy to be open and honest about it. I'm very keen for this to be a study that helps us forwards with this particular museum concept, and I've got no doubt that Peddle-Thorpe, an architectural firm which would be able to provide a high quality report at potentially that price. But we are the money that we spend in our budget on items is not our money, it's ratepayers' money that they entrust us to use sensibly. And I ultimately did not feel that we should direct staff to ask one firm only for this particular report. I thought that there may well be other architectural firms with good ideas, better ideas maybe, not as good an idea, possibly, at the same budget who may be able to help. I think just it would be more open and transparent if it was put to tender than we direct staff specifically to a particular firm.
Councillor Vanderman, you comfortable with that?
Well, on the basis of the fact that it was Peddle-Thorpe that indicated that a budget of about $15,500 was anticipated for the project, I would have thought that within our tender and acquisition guidelines that the $15,500 was well within our ambit to approve at any council meeting. Obviously, if it had been $250,000 plus, we'd have to go to tender. But all right, look, I'm happy with the motion if it achieves the result that Councillor Stutchbury, is looking for. But I would have thought that the leaving Peddle-Thorpe as the tenderers, obviously they've had some previous experience with this particular issue in Albury before, and I would have thought that they would be the ideal people to go forward with this particular project. But if this is what Councillor Stutchbury is requiring or would like, well, then I'm happy to support that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, begin.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Clearly, later tonight we are going to be discussing another report, the UDIF report, and that's an excellent report, and I would hope that Council will see it favourably. Despite the extravagant newspaper article published late last week suggesting that there was going to be a pugilistic response from various members of the UMCT about this issue. In fact, nothing could be further than the truth. The report we're going to talk about later tonight is an excellent report, and what we are looking for here is just to fully explore alternatives. The DC2 at present requires relocation. Its restoration, which is vitally important to the entire project, its restoration cannot proceed in any realistic way until it is placed into a larger building. A larger building has likely been selected, as will be discussed later on. This building may or may not become the final museum and resting place of the DC2. We don't know that because we haven't really fully explored alternatives. And this notice of motion is purely to look further afield than the airport precinct for a museum for the DC2. Single-purpose museums don't have a high chance of success. Most museums do well when they're placed adjacent to museums looking at other items of interest, and the QE2 location, the potential QE2 location for an Ivy museum is ideal in regards to it being adjacent to another museum. It's also adjacent to a large a roving population of people interested in exploring what Albury's got to offer. And so this location deserves full exploration before it's either excluded forever or potentially chosen as a potential site beyond the airport precinct. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker against, Councillor Gluckin.
Thank you. I speak against but may not vote against. And I'd just like to emphasise that because I am extremely protective of the IVA and keeping it as a whole plane. I remember some councils ago, councillors suggesting that we would cut the engines off and put the nose cone at the front. Heaven forbid that may have happened, or that was even considered as happening at some stage. So I'm very supportive of the IVA. And I was supportive of this as a notion when it was first suggested. This motion was first suggested by Councillor Stutchbury, in so much as I believe we need to be finding a medium to longer term solution for the IVA. And clearly in the short term, this is not an option for the IVA. But the medium to longer term, we definitely do need to be considering. The short term, clearly, the continued renovation and restoration of the IVA is the important part. I was also unaware of the other report when this motion was first raised by Councillor Stutchbury. I was unaware that that would also be in tonight's agenda, and so I'm thinking the conflict between the two. There is a relationship and they would support one another to a degree, but I'm also thinking about the conflict between the two reports, and so therefore I thought it wise to speak against, raise my concerns, and trust that in closing debate, Councillor Stutchbury may be able to answer some of my concerns. But I was heartened to hear the opening remarks by Councillor Stutchbury. I wonder if, and I agree with the concept of co-location of museum facilities. That is absolutely something that would encourage visitation. I was originally hopeful that we might find a longer term solution within the airport building itself out at the airport. Regretfully, I couldn't convince the other councillors on council at the time that we should enlarge the airport building, take it up and house the IVA within that area that has since been redeveloped, but not sufficiently to be able to house a DC2. I'm wondering if it might be possible to use some of the, excuse the pun, airspace on the roof of the museum. Could that be a consideration? We're looking at redeveloping the convention wing of the entertainment centre sometime in the medium to longer term. Might that be an option for us to be able to consider housing the IVA on that roof space as opposed to taking land space? And I note the hesitation in the documentation about minimal or no grass area of QE2? Might it be possible to take that plane up, not on stilts as it was, to provide for a housed space museum? I sum up by saying, whilst I have spoken against this, I'm hopeful that I can be given assurance by Councillor Stutchbury or perhaps even other councillors that these two reports tonight, or this motion and the later report, are actually complementary, and that we can work with the two in unison, and trust that this won't preclude anything from the second report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gluckin. Councillor Thurley speaking for.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I see absolutely no conflict between the two. This motion simply seeks to explore another alternative, another option. It does not make any final decisions. It does not rule out any options that are presently on the table. And if you look at the report that we will see later in the agenda, it talks about option one, which is to house the plane in the hangar at the airport, and that's necessary for the complete restoration. We need, the restorers need that space. But then it says stage two, fit out the aircraft hangar as a simple museum, build public awareness and visitation levels, seek capital funding for a purpose-built museum. Stage three, develop a purpose-built Ivor Museum from concept development to opening 2025 to 2030. So the long-term fate of the Ivor restored plane has not been decided today, does not need to be decided today. We have a dedicated group of people getting this plane restored. The long-term vision is, where is it best housed and where does it tell the story best? This is simply one option, to explore the concept of housing it in a purpose-built building which incorporates the Bellbridge building, the lane and so on. No decision tonight precludes anything happening. It simply gets more information to provide a more detailed set of information for councillors at some stage in the future. And if I look at those timelines, it might not be me or any of the councillors sitting here tonight. It just is seeking, Councillor Stutchbury's motion is seeking further information to provide more options and more things to be considered by councils. I see no conflict at all, and I hope that no one in the UMCT believes this is in any way contradicting or against what they are proposing and what they are achieving at the moment. The hangar option will have to be used to finish the restoration. What happens after that is another decision that can be made later, and this is simply providing further information to inform that decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Another speaker for, but I have a question from Councillor Gluckin.
Thank you. Through you to the mover and to the seconder, could they consider some slight rewording, perhaps, so as to not emphasise Bellbridge's and the Laneway and the Library Museum and the Retro Cafe primarily, but to more highlight that area generally, so that it could be, for example, over the road, or the convention centre roof space could be a consideration, to slightly broaden that area. Would that be possible?
Councillor Stutchbury.
I am not sure, to be frank. I would state at the outset, and I was going to bring this to your attention in my closing statement, the Bellbridge Hague building is the last remaining privately owned building in that entire QE2 square locality bounded by Kiewa, Swift, Olive and Dean Street. And, you know, I'm not wanting to go and take it off anyone who owns it without their consent. But I think that this is an opportunity to make that entire square publicly owned and to utilise the space for museums and other items of public interest. And so in some respects, there could well be a dual purpose to the motion, which is not only to create a museum, but also to make the entire space publicly owned forever for all future users of the area. So, yeah, I'm keen to hear the seconder's thoughts on this, but I'm at this point in time, without being argumentative, would probably leave it as it is.
Councillor Thurley?
I wouldn't be open to changing the words. If we read it, it says in or about an area covered by. In or about means any of that. So it's sufficiently general right now that we get a concept plan, an idea, without being very specific at all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey, you wish to speak for?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I speak for the motion. I support the motion that is before us. I am happy to look at the allocation not to exceed $15,500. However, I do not want to see 1 inch of the grass area of QE2 Square taken up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. There are no further speakers for or against. I just wish to speak in relation to this issue, and I too agree with Councillor Glacken. We need to allay any fears, and Councillor Thurley, that this is not a process of eliminating Bristol Court or any other potential report that's before us. This is the future, potential future of this artefact, and we don't know, and we probably are setting this particular process in motion because it is a generational process. It's not a tomorrow process. So 2025 or 2030, the team, the IVA team, are working really hard. I think for now we need to facilitate a way to make their job a lot easier. This is just the next step, and I too would say that this does not replace what's been before. Having been to all the consultancies with the previous consultants mentioned in the report, in tonight's report, this was considered an opportunity and certainly something they didn't discount. So that I would see this motion as an extension of that, and to give it some legacy and some rigour to understand in perpetuity what that would look like if we chose to go down that path. I know we've discounted the airport, we've discounted a number of locations around Albury, and certainly I do not disagree with what Councillor Stutchbury said, but on the same token, Belbridge Hague's building, and the owners in today's audience, is a heritage listed building and is quite a beautiful building. So you might be robbing Peter to pay Paul, but anyway, we'll see what comes back from the report. So Councillor Stutchbury, did you wish to close debate?
I will close the debate. Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I'll be reasonably brief about it. In regards to the UMCT, the Ivor Memorial Community Trust, this trust is indeed doing a great job in the restoration of the aircraft and also grappling with the problems of where and how to create a museum. And this issue was discussed at the most recent meeting of the UMCT, and there was it was discussed in good humour and without any argument. Sorry, David, but there just wasn't any. We all on the UMCT understand that restoring the aeroplane is stage one, and we need the hangar to complete that because it can't be completed where the aircraft is currently housed. And then the issue of the museum is the next important step. Councillor Doxey, I 100% agree with you that we should not be consuming any grassed area in the QE2 square. One of the problems we will see with the later UDIF report that we'll be discussing is that there was a concept drawing which seemed to consume many square metres of grass on QE2 Square, but it was just a concept drawing, but it wasn't really a good look, and it was widely misunderstood at the time. So, thank you very much indeed for discussing this motion, and I look forward to seeing it pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. There are no presentations, deputations, reports and minutes of committees and working parties. Minutes of the Sustainability Advisory Committee meeting held on the 6th of August. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council receive note and accept the minutes and recommendations of the Sustainability Advisory Committee meeting held on Tuesday the 6th of August 2019.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that?
Just to mention two things. National Tree Day, which in fact was held over 3 days, not one day, was a great success this year, and we had a number of new schools entered this program, and it seems to grow better and better every year. And the other thing that I'd like to get out on public notice is that the Wildflower Walk on Nailcan Hill has been scheduled for the 29th of September this year. I understand we're looking for people with knowledge and expertise in that area to be leaders, guides, etc. So I commend that to everyone present.
Thank you. On that note, happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Documents for sealing, 12.1. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Vandervan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll recommend, or move as a recommendation that Council authorise the seal to be affixed to the documents outlined below in the presence of two signatories authorised to affix the seal pursuant to Regulation 400 of the Local Government General Regulation 2005 and the Council seal and management of legal documents and advice procedure. A. AlburyCity lease to Greenwell's Fly Fishing Club Incorporated at Greenfield Park, 5-year with 5-year option commencing 1 June 2019, file 09/00358. And B, Community Fair Scheme Agreement between AlburyCity and Regional Express Rex Airlines on the Albury to Melbourne route for a 3-year period commencing 1 July 2019 to 30 June 2022, file 19/04194.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
I second that, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Vandervan, do you wish to speak to those at all?
No, the discussion was had at the last council meeting regarding the Community Fair Scheme Agreement, and that was a really good thing to do, and hopefully people will take up the opportunity to travel to Melbourne quickly by air. So, yeah, no further comment. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. The first CM13 officers' reports for consideration. 13.1 development application 10.2019.3675.4.1 124 Alexandra Way. Councillor Gluckin.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move the recommendation as a motion that Council receive and note the contents of the report and grant development consent to development application 10.2019.3675.4.1, subject to the conditions contained in the draft determination included in this report at attachment 5.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Gluckin, do you wish to open debate on that item?
Very briefly, and I do acknowledge that I have not been at all of the meetings that this has been discussed. However, it is was being discussed for some considerable months, and so I participated in some of the debate to date. This development, I know, is not something that necessarily everyone in that vicinity is happy about. However, I am aware that some considerable time has now passed since the application was put through. A few things have been modified, and at the end of the day, as much as it pains me to be reminded, even myself, we own our properties to be able to do what we want, so long as it fits in with the guidelines with the development permissible within our community, and each of us owns our block of land. The neighbours are obviously not very happy with all of the development. They have indicated that it is not that they don't agree with development, it is more that the development doesn't suit their location on the plot, that they chose to put their building, etc. And there are a few other little nuances as well. But the reality is these people wish to develop their property and have gone through due process to be able to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker against, Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't like this development application. When I first became aware of it, I thought, it looks all right. It's a big block of land, and even when it's cut into two, the two subsequent blocks would still be well above the average size of the blocks of land in the vicinity. However, over time, we have all heard what's been happening out there, and in particular, what happened on Samantha Court, where a controversial DA went through with approval from staff without being referred to council, and that particular DA on Samantha Court is quite highly relevant to this particular DA because it puts in a rural development houses much closer together, potentially, than the people who purchased the blocks and developed them themselves would have wished. So I don't have any particular problem with the actual subdivision because, as I stated, it does make a very big block into two still fairly decent-sized blocks. But the location of the building envelope and the size of the building envelope bothers me. It's a very big building envelope, and it is located really far too close to the adjacent blocks, some of which already have houses on them and some of them don't. I would much prefer that building envelope to be placed more to the eastern side of that block, should this DA be successful. I will not support this DA with the building envelope in its current location. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Speaker 4, Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And in contrast to Councillor Stutchbury, I'm going to quote directly from the document that covers this DA and all of its nuances. And I go to page 55 of our electronic copy, and it basically, under the existing lot sizes map, if you like, within Claremont Estate, comes the wording: the proposed subdivision is considered consistent with the character of the area. The building envelope is cited taking into consideration the surrounding built form and character of the locality. Further discussion on this at part 5.7 of this report. The large setback is respectful of the streetscape character and the position of adjacent buildings. Any future building or dwelling will be able to achieve adequate solar access and will not impact on the solar access of adjacent properties. Further along, we have some detailed discussion about the streetscape. The upshot of that is that the proposed subdivision is therefore consistent with this established streetscape insofar as it seeks to create two 2-hectare lots with comparable road frontage. The building envelope will be set back further from the street to lessen amenity impacts on the neighbouring dwelling on the 0.9 hectare lot to the north. This dwelling is set back approximately 20 metres from the existing northern boundary of the subject lot. The subdivision application does not reduce this setback. So from my perspective, this development application has been to us now 3 times. It's been advertised 3 times. We've had a couple of community forums about this. I think that there has been some movement from the developer in as far as the building envelope size is concerned and also some of the setbacks. So from my perspective, if the council staff and all of our objectives of our DCP are met, I see no reason to not approve this DA. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vandervan. Councillor Thurley wishes to speak for, no speakers against.
I'll be very brief. The proposed two-lot subdivision meets the requirements greater than 2 hectares on each occasion. While the matter of Samantha Cook may be of serious concern, it cannot form any part of the assessment of this DA. And I'd only like also to note that while there's a building envelope given in this DA, any house to be built will be the subject of a separate DA, and council will have the opportunity to comment and either approve or disapprove such a DA. So I speak in favour.
Thank you. There being no further speakers for or against, Councillor Gluckin, did you wish to close debate?
Thank you. Yes. I raise again, thank you, Mr Mayor. I raise again in closing the issue of people wanting to do with their own property what they would like to do, and it doesn't necessarily suit the neighbours. The reality is this property is privately owned, as is the neighbour's property. The neighbours situated there. Just one example is the neighbours situated their dwelling where they wanted to, where it suited them to at the time. And I understand that they were not aware that there would be necessarily a dwelling, a further dwelling on the property beside them. And I appreciate that they will have placed their dwelling based on the given information that they had at the time, the best information they had at the time. But the reality is the owners of this property being proposed for development in this application tonight likewise want to do what they want to do with their property. And I note from the diagram on electronic copy page 59 where we see the gold or yellow building envelope proposed, that the building envelope appears to be a fairly equidistant distance from the boundary, as is the neighbour's property. So, councillors, I support this application. I am mindful of the personal feelings of people in this proximity, in this neighbourhood. The reality is this application meets our requirements, is mindful of the neighbours and should be approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gluckin. I'll now put the motion in the form of a division. Those for the recommendation? Councillors Doxey, Councillors Gluckin, Councillor Thurley, Councillor Vandervan. Those against? Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Mack and Councillor King. The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. We have 13.2, the development application 10.2018.36436.1 childcare facility at Fairway Gardens Road, Thaguna. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Gluckin.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to move the recommendation as a motion that council receive and note the contents of this report, and B, grant partial development consent, noting that it excludes the signage component, to development application 10.2018.36436.1 for the centre-based childcare facility at corner of Fairway Gardens and Thaguna Drive, Thaguna, western part of lot 924 on DP 1245055, subject to the conditions contained in the draft determination included in this report at attachment 10.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Gluckin, you wish to open debate.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This development again isn't to everyone's liking, and I know that there are a significant number of people in the vicinity of this development who are not happy. The reality is, again, this is privately owned property. My understanding from reading the documentation and from being involved in the initial discussions and having listened to this as an ongoing concern for some months now, I feel that whilst there are genuine concerns by the neighbours, or the neighbours feel they have genuine concerns, The proponent for this development has attempted to take some of those concerns on board, and I believe that they have given due consideration to better assimilate this development within that space. The reality is that this development is permissible, and so long as the conditions that have been put in the draft determination are applied, then this development should, I believe, proceed. As I've stated, a number of considerations have been taken on board by the developer, including the resiting, looking at other materials for the fencing, to attempt to try and assist and alleviate the concerns of those immediate and neighbours in the local vicinity. So I do support this development tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gluckin. The board seems to be all silent on this issue. In that case, will speak in relation to this matter. I personally raised this at the workshop, and it was quoted by one of the speakers that I felt there could have been opportunity to shift this development because the land is wholly and solely owned by the person developing the childcare facility. Clearly, that couldn't happen or wasn't considered. Looking through the report, there's mention of a fence, which to me, ColourBond is not an ideal dampener for noise. And in terms of this group of councillors, Irvington Court, we spoke about that the other day in open council, and we didn't vote for that because of the concerns with noise and the amenity of the neighbourhood. There are established homes in the vicinity of this particular development, and hearing from the proponents and looking at the original discussion we had about this, the fence, if it's installed in its current form, whilst will address some of the noise, at 45 dB, we're right on the border line in relation to what is suitable and what is adequate. The fact that we ignore the furtherance of that fence line to include the car park, which at times coming and going of vehicles is quite disruptive to anyone, is again not what I requested or intended to request during the public forum discussion, that I suggested that a suitable fence line be included in this development that would ensure some sanity when it comes to noise reduction. Now, ColourBond to me is not that solution, whilst it is, and if you Google it, it is considered a minimal way of reducing noise compared to other masonry products and other dampeners available on the market. The fact that it is the cheapest option seems to me to be the case in the point in question. When we're talking about 45 dB, I really can't see, and the fact that the report that was provided by the expert, I can't really see that there is any guarantee that it will do what it's intended to do. And I have my concerns about that, because this is the purpose of why we build our homes. They are our castles. And certainly in this case, the people who have been before this council tonight and in previous iterations of public forums are entitled to their views. And they have spent a lot of time developing their homes and providing those homes, and understanding that if anything was built in the close proximity, that we as council would take some ownership of that. So on the issue of amenity, on the issue of providing a noise-free or noiseless environment, less than 45 dB, I'm a little bit unconvinced that the action of this short length of fencing, even if it went the whole boundary, it would be a lot better than what is proposed, is not adequate. And on that basis, I don't think I can support this DA. Councillor Stush, would you wish to speak for?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't going to speak for it, but when you made the comment about someone's home being their castle, I felt that I should, because I raised this issue at the public forum at the time, and I'll raise it again now. I'm looking at a map of the area involved, and most of the houses which are going to back onto the proposed childcare centre, the house is built virtually to the boundary of the property, so they're right on their fence line. Now, if I was building a castle, I would probably build a moat around it. And these houses are essentially, to me, looking at this map and using a bit of back of the hand mathematics, they look like they're about 600 square metre blocks with 550 square metre houses on them. There's no recognisable backyard for most of them. And if you're going to build that close to your boundary, then I think that you're exposing yourself to the risk of listening to the happy babble of playing children. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Councillor Vanderman, you wish to speak for now.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm going to speak for this development. One of the things that I really want to talk about is some of the objections that have been raised by the local residents, and the one that really irks me a little bit is the fact that they're suggesting that there's enough childcare centres in the area. Who are we to tell somebody who wants to invest in a childcare centre there's enough childcare centres? If the development meets our requirements as far as the DCP is concerned, and it meets the state government's requirements as far as the DCP and their requirements are concerned, then we don't have any role in providing a less competitive environment, if you like, for childcare centres in the area. The issue for me is that this is one of the longest DAs that we've ever dealt with, as far as the number of pages that are covered in the report from the staff. And the fact remains that the majority of the issues that are dealt with in this report are state government requirements as far as childcare centres are concerned, as it is a permissible use within our DCP and also within the state planning laws. And the planning department have, through some iterations, got a better, if you like, a better outcome as far as the noise is concerned that was originally proposed. I see no reason why we should not approve this development application. Obviously, there's some signage elements that we need to, that were taken out of this particular development consent, but from the perspective of its permissible use, it meets our guidelines. There's really no departures from the DCP that we've seen. A lot of our development applications that are justified by the planning department, there's none of those, so I see no reason why this should not proceed. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. No further speakers for or against. Councillor Glaken, just to close debate.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. Considerable work has been undertaken by the developer to, as I said earlier, to try and mitigate against some of the concerns by the neighbours in close and medium proximity. They've reduced the hours of operation from the original proposed, which were permissible, but they've reduced them. They've increased the setback. Someone earlier this evening said they have not moved the, in fact, I think a couple of people have said they haven't moved the build. Yes, they have moved the build, only by a metre, but they have moved the build. There's increased landscaping. They've indicating a reduced floor level in part of the development as well to try and help mitigate against the noise. They're looking at restricting the outdoor, or the times of outdoor play in the outdoor area, which again shows consideration for the neighbours. I think noting that they didn't have to do any of that really for it to be permissible, I think the developers have gone considerable way towards alleviating or attempting to alleviate the concerns of the neighbours. And as Councillor Vanderven said, it is permissible. It is something that the developer wants to build in this area, whether people think that they need childcare, further places out in that vicinity or not, is irrelevant. The fact is that that person wants to do what they want with their land, and it is permissible. So I support the application tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Councillor Stutchbury, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Gluckin, Councillor Thurley and Councillor Vanderman. All those against? Councillor Mack and Councillor King. The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. We have 13.3, the leachate discharge pressure pipeline in Mudge Street and Centre Road. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that council accepts the tender from Longford Civil Proprietary Limited for the leachate discharge main on Mudge Street and Centaur Road for the lump sum amount of $87,615, including GST.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor. Fairly straightforward matter.
Thank you. On that note, no further discussion is required. No one wanting to ask questions, I'll have to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 13.4, Albury Waste Management Centre Construction Demolition Waste Material Recovery Facility Plant. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that council accepts the tender from Waste Tech Engineering Proprietary Limited, ACN 059404152, for contract number 18/02784, design and construction of the Albury Waste Management Centre Construction and Demolition Waste Material Recovery Facility Plant for the lump sum amount of $1,119,800, including GST.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, I have a question. Do you wish me to take the question before we open debate?
Okay.
Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I probably should have taken the opportunity to talk to staff before tonight, but I'm just interested in the fact that we've got 4 quotations for this particular job, and it doesn't appear that any of them are local. So my question through you to the relevant member of staff, is this such a specialist area that it is the remit of only a few companies to be able to build these sorts of facilities?
Mr Ferris.
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, that is my understanding, that this type of equipment is built by very few suppliers in our country.
So just to follow up,
Yep.
Mr Mayor, is that the equipment or the actual building? Because the quotation is for the design and construct.
Mr Ferris.
Through you, Mr Mayor. So, yeah, it's for design and construct of the equipment. The building itself will be a separate tender at a later date. Once the set out of the equipment is known, then we will call tenders for a building.
Okay, so my confusion then, Mr Mayor, stems from the English language, which is at its best again, because it says material recovery facility plant. So I didn't twig that we're talking about the equipment to do the material recovery rather than a plant to house the material recovery equipment. So there, the English language again is causing confusion.
Mr Ferris, have you got any clarification on that English language?
Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, opening debate, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I think in future perhaps all of these items should be published in both English and Dutch, but for the time being, we'll stick with the English language version. Look, I had dozens of points to make about this particular matter, but in your interests of time, I'm not going to put any of them forward.
Okay. There being no further questions or debate, I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 13.5, the Edamoga Sewage Augmentation Contract, which I believe could have components of confidentiality attached to it. So for the purpose of completion of the meeting and continuity of the meeting, There could be matters and information that would, if disclosed, confer a commercial advantage on a person with whom the council is conducting or proposes to conduct business. So, in the interest of that particular item, I'm happy to hold it over till the end of the meeting after notice of urgent business prior to confidential, in case we have to go into confidential. So, in the interest of not vacating the chamber and putting people at a disadvantage. So we'll move on to CM 13.6, proposed Ginder at Albury Recreational Path Working Party. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the recommendation and motion that Council A endorse option 1 and accept Greater Hume Council's invitation to reconvene a working party for the Ginder to Albury Recreational Path, and B, nominate elected representatives to sit on this working party.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Vanderman, do you wish to speak to that?
No, look, I think whilst I think that this is a project that we should probably see again to a conclusion. It appears that it's already been fallen foul to the political cycle at some stage. Yeah, the political cycle at some stage. And perhaps we need to, if we get a resolution out of the working party, we should perhaps try and depoliticise it a little bit in future, so that anyway, so that the work that the people have done doesn't go unrewarded. I do have some concerns, obviously, about funding for projects of this nature, the justification for it, which was also something that you raised in the discussion in the public forum. But I'm happy to have to reconvene that working party, and would be happy to sit on that working party if our fellow councillors would see fit to do that after this particular motion has got through.
Thank you, Councillor Vanderman. And with the expertise of the Dutch and the cycling, you would be a
thank you,
regarded
Mr. Mayor.
influence. I have a speaker against, but two questions. First, I'll take Councillor Doxey a question.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Given that Councillor Con is a cyclist, is there any discussion with her at this stage about being on the committee if the motion is passed?
Yes, he has indicated an intention to nominate for this committee, and we'll consider that once we get to that point in question. Councillor Glacken, question?
Yes. In the event that this is passed tonight, if this is passed, I'll say, if this is passed, could the staff please include discussion with the ultimate working party about the suitability of the trail to ensure that we get maximum usage should it be built, noting the question I asked of the speakers. How do you get people, cyclists, to use these pathways when you build them and they resist using them? Oh, because they've got bollards on them or they're wonky. Well, we've got one road, that one road, and all vehicles have to share that. So how do we get all cyclists to share such a path? If that could just be taken on, I'd be most grateful. Thank you.
No worries. Mr Ferris, you're nodding silently.
We can take that on board.
Thank you. Speaker against, Councillor King.
Yes, I'm speaking against this. I can absolutely see zero net benefit to anyone in Albury regarding this proposal. I think we were quoted some figures of approximately $3 million for the Albury side and a significant amount for the Greater Hume side. The speakers have spoken that 33,000 vehicles travel along that road every week. I think that the $6 million should be spent in upgrading the actual road that would benefit the 33,000 commuters on that road, rather than a select group of people that may or may not want to ride to Gindera or vice versa.
Thank you. Speaker 4, Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I do speak in favour of this. Basically, this motion simply says we'll reconvene a working party. It's not endorsing a bike track. It's not worried about whether you've got middle-aged men in lycra, as I once was. Mammals, that's right. I refer to myself more as a gommel, that was grumpy old man in lycra. All we're doing here is reconvening a working party. We've had this working party once before. The cost at the moment is utterly irrelevant. We need to find out, by having this working party, what the view of the community is to doing this. If the view of the community through the working party and any surveys they do is this is a load of rubbish and we don't want to do it, let the cyclists ride up the narrow edge of the road and get run over, well, that'll be the outcome. This is just a working party to explore the options. From my experience as a cyclist, and I have ridden round the bay in a day 5 times, I've had things thrown at me from cars. I've been knocked off my bike by a motorist driving inattentively on the left side of the road. I was not even on the road, I was outside on the shoulder. We need to help and look after our cyclists, and we need to try and encourage our community to get on their bike and get out of their car. And all we're doing here is putting a working party together to explore how this might be achieved. In the end, if it's not achieved, that's fine too, but we need to explore it.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, speaker for, no speakers against.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I wasn't going to speak for this. I was just going to vote for it, but when there was a speaker against, I thought that I should have my 2 cents worth. That was only 1 cent. I've got another cent to go. I holiday in a location that has a shared cycleway, and it is it's a tremendous success, shared by cyclists, walkers, runners, etc. And you can only hope that such things are so busy that there is the potential for conflict amongst users rather than just gathering cobwebs. But as Councillor Thurley so succinctly stated, this is just a working party to research it. We're not voting for the thing, but I think that it's a fabulous idea, and I don't want to be on the working party, by the way. Could I just make that clear?
Yeah.
I think that Councillor Van der Ven and Councillor Con would work together admirably on this project.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, there are no further comments or questions. I too would like to endorse this working party as an opportunity to further expand on our 2 cities, 1 community bicycle path network, which is becoming one of the better identified regional assets across Australia. And I think I'd like to explore the feasibility of this, but I'd also like to understand who the user groups would be, having been on one of those bike paths and had a cyclist with a trailer with a child behind it coming down the hill at 100 km an hour and suddenly pull out from the side because they'd done a wee-wee in the bushes. That's a lot of braking, but I still think we cannot disclose or discount this. I think it's okay to reconvene in the working committee and certainly speak with Greater Human, the stakeholders, about the opportunities that may be available. On that note, I need to call for nomination. I've got Councillor Con and Councillor Van der Ven. Is there any other councillor that might be interested? There's no number set on this one. Not Councillor Stutchbury. Okay. So I'm happy not to include Councillor Con and Councillor Van der Ven as the nominated elected representatives to sit on this working party. So do we need to change, or that's part of the motion? Yeah, I think we just leave it as it is. So happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. CM 13.7, the Lamington CBD Crime Safety Review. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Glacken.
Sorry, I thought we would be dealing with nominations to move second and endorse nominations for the...
Well, they were one and the same motion, and we did nominate during the motion, and I'm happy for the staff to continue with those names, given it is just a working party. It's not a section 3, what are we, 359 or something? 355 committee.
We're happy to include it in the motion.
But we're happy to include it in the motion as B, if you like, Councillor Glacken, that nominate Councillor Vandervan and Councillor Con as the representatives to sit on the working party. If we just include that, and I'll recommit the motion. Councillor Cameron, is that part of the new rule? It's a bit like being nominated the treasurer for a committee you don't want to be the treasurer for. Thank you for that. And so we'll recommit that. I'll put it again. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, Councillor Glacken. Okay, 13.7. Thank you, councillors. We need a mover. Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. I move that Council A further investigate the development of a CCTV system in the Lavington CBD and allocate up to $25,000 at September budget review to engage a consultant to prepare a concept plans and cost estimates. B, receive a further report on the consultant's findings. C, continue monitoring the release of the Community and Small Business CCTV Fund grants or similar, which may provide organisations and business operators in the Lavington CBD opportunity to seek assistance for the supply and installation of CCTV systems on their premises. And D, not pursue the placement of mobile CCTV cameras at roundabouts in Lavington and North Albury.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
More than happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. I have numerous questions. I'm sure you're comfortable for me to take them, Councillor Stutchbury. Councillor King.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you. Just going through about the participants in the survey, 63% female and 35% male equals 98%. Okay, I'll move on. The participants also were 29% 65 to 74, 17% 45 to 54, and 16% 55 to 64, leaving 38% below 45. Was the target of this report particularly directed to people above the age of 45?
Ms Squire, did you want Ms Code
Yes,
up here to answer those
yes,
questions?
if I could, Mr Mayor.
I'd read your mind. Ms Code.
Thank you. Thank you for the question through you, Mr Mayor. With regard to the gender, we had the option of not disclosing or leaving that blank. So 1.6 or 7% of people chose not to disclose whether they identified as male or female. With regard to the intercept, it was a intercept during the daytime and on Saturday, so it was about who the surveyors encountered, which was predominantly that age group.
Councillor King, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, look, I'm concerned that this report is not representative of the wider community when 38% are missing that are under the age of 45, and that we're not getting an accurate feedback on the responses. I mean, not many people live to 90, you know, so we're really at the top end of that that demographic, and Lavington area, and certainly that, you know, has significant younger people that live out there, people of a different demographic that live in other places in Albury, and I'm just concerned that this report doesn't accurately reflect the data that we should be making a decision on, given that only people above 45 years old were spoken to.
So what's the question?
I don't think it's correct.
Ms Code.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor, thank you for the question. Other people than those below 45 are spoken to, so a whole range of age groups were spoken to. This just captures the predominant groupings, and it's about who was intercepted at the time that the surveys were conducted. So certainly other age groups were also interviewed. They just made up the other percentages which are not mentioned in the summary in the report. And I can.
Councillor Vanderman, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm just a bit concerned about the amount of money we're going to spend on to engage a consultant to prepare concept plans and cost estimates. We've been through this process in a detailed fashion with the CCTV in the CBD area. I thought that would have built up a bank of information and knowledge that would assist us in coming up with some sort of a concept plan and cost estimates internally. I mean, obviously, maybe things have gone up a little bit, but it's only 12 months or so that the CBD, Albury CBD CCTV system was, opened, commissioned. I'm just concerned about the amount of money that is being set aside up to.
Point of order, Mr Mayor. Is Councillor Van asking a question, or is he debating the motion?
He's about to ask a question.
Not debating the motion.
Sorry, I jumped in too soon.
Thank you. Councillor
It's
Vanderman,
just to get
question?
back for the 2 cents worth, I know. So my question, Mr Mayor, that I was getting to is, do we have the internal resources available to do the concept plans and cost estimate and engage a tender? Thank you.
Ms Cade.
Thank you for the question, through you, Mr Mayor. The technical expertise is very specialised. At the previous Albury CBD CCTV installation, that part of the works was tendered out and someone else provided the detailed cost estimates and what was required, the types of cameras, the locations, the network, the infrastructure, all of that. It's a very specialised area. We cannot simply take the data from Albury CBD CCTV and transport it to Lavington because there's a few different options. We could potentially have entry and exit CCTV surveillance, which is a different type of initiative, and again it'll depend on police feedback, so you don't have the same amount of cameras located in the same sort of saturation, but just at certain entry and exit points, and again it's about police priorities and what they want to police. Or we could choose to have Zone 1, 2 or Zone 3, as per the report, saturated with cameras. Now all of that will require a detailed look at the type of the laneways, where the cameras are best placed. Camera technology has also slightly progressed, so it is something that we need specialist advice on if we want to get a detailed cost estimate which is accurate, or as accurate as it can be, because it isn't a costly exercise and we want to make sure we're using the money appropriately if we apply.
Councillor King, you have another question?
Another question. Thank you, Mr Mayor. With your map with the red and orange and yellow on page 159, there's no legend to what the red, other than high instances and low incidences. Could you enlighten us with some actual figures of, are we talking hundreds, thousands, two?
Ms Cade.
Thank you for the question, through you, Mr Mayor. The level of access that Albury City Council has for Boscar is that which is accessible to any member of the public. So the heat map which you see gives us an indicator of intensity per postcode, 2640 and 2641, of incidents. So red is high, orange is less, yellow is even less. The police have the more statistical data. They have access to actual numbers. We cannot provide you those numbers. That is police data. This is to give you an indicator of where the hotspots are in the region.
Okay. Councillor Stuttery, you may open debate.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you for the opportunity of allowing me to open the debate on this matter. First of all, I'd just like to say at the outset that I'm tragically disappointed that Councillor Cameron is an apology, because I'm sure that he would have contributed significantly to any debate on this matter and may have even moved it himself. On the topic of heat maps, anyone who is a fan of the AFL will understand the significance and utility of heat maps, Councillor King. I am a big fan of the old saying that an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. However, I think that the jury is still out on whether CCTV in fact prevents crime. However, there's no harm in having pictures of the alleged offenders in order to be able to identify them and apprehend them at a later date. So, although it will be lovely to think that putting CCTV in will actually reduce the temperature of those heat maps, it possibly won't, but at least we might make the police department's job a bit easier pursuing results. In regards to the roundabouts, yes, I'm sure that Councillor Cameron would be very disappointed that that's not in the proposal, but let's await the further report from the consultant, assuming that this motion is successful.
Thank you. No speakers against. Speaker for, Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This motion rides on the back of the success of the CCTV in the Albury Central Business District. All the statistics and reports we've received have been in favour of the installation. Council didn't fund the entire installation of CCTV, and that will be the opportunity here to look for other opportunities for funding. This is calling for a report. I do have no issues at all in relation to the $25,000 being spent for this. I think it will give us the results that we need to go forward with funding applications. CCTV is not there to prevent, it is there to assist the authorities in the detection and then the future prosecution of offenders. Drunks do not look up and look for a CCTV camera before they king hit someone. That doesn't happen in reality. It is there to purely detect and then prosecute those individuals doing those things in our city. So in summary, I fully support, as I've only seconded the motion. I allowed Councillor Sutchbury to push the button just before me so he could read it all. But I will certainly vote in favour of this motion. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. There are no further speakers for or against, but in finality, I would just like to state that in the first instance with the Dean Street cameras, there was great support for those cameras, and it has been identified that they probably statistically don't reduce crime. However, they seek to reinforce the opportunities to solve crime. Is it the responsibility of the state government or the federal government or the local government to provide support and funding of those particular cameras? Well, we were very successful with the funding for Dean Street, and I can't see with this particular motion why we wouldn't be significantly positioned to include it in Lavington. I think Lavington has a great need. There's been a lot of feedback from business owners and people, anecdotally to myself and other councillors, which would indicate that there are problems out in particularly the Griffith Road precinct and the red hot spots that have been identified. Without the comprehensive analysis, we don't know what the offences are, but damage is one of those significant offences. So if we can do something to detect a criminal or allow people to feel safer at night, then I think that's really going part of the way to doing what we do as local government representatives, which is looking after our ratepayers. Councillor Stutchbury, did you wish to close debate?
Thank you, Constable Mack. Sorry, Mr Mayor. I have no desire to close the debate. Everything that has been said and should have been said was said.
Thank you. That would be like calling Major Doxey private. Thank you very much, Councillor Doxey. Councillor Stutchbury. Okay, on that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 13.8, the Mama Advisory Committee change of membership. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A endorse the appointment of Simon McMaster to the vacant position on the committee, and B, endorse the draft committee terms of reference membership that 1, amends the terms of reference membership to clarify the number of voting positions on the committee, 2, removes my mama position effective 1st of September 2019, and 3, renames the Director Community and Recreation position to Deputy CEO, Business Growth and Community, or nominated delegate.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Thurley, you wish to speak to that?
I just briefly to note it's a fairly procedural matter. There have been a number of changes so that the Friends of Mama, Mo Mama, no longer exist, and therefore that position needs to be removed, and it's really a matter of tidying up some of the governance arrangements with Mama, and I commend this.
Thank you. No further question or debate. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 13.9, the Ivor Display and Interpretive Facility Feasibility Study. And how ironic. Councillor Stutchbury, you wish to move this?
I don't think it's ironic at all, Mr Mayor, but I would, in fact, like to move that A, Council note the Ivor Display and Interpretive Facility Feasibility Study, and B, continues to provide facilitation support to the UMCT to pursue its endorsed option 1 utilisation of the Bristol Court hangar to progress the Ivor Memorial Aircraft restoration.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Stutchbury, do you wish to speak to that?
I will speak to this quite briefly. I thought this was, in many respects, an excellent report, quite technical in places, specifically in relation to how museums can attract visitors and turn those visitations into funding. It was really a very good report in that respect. The DC2 presently requires to be rehoused, and this report paved the way towards acquisition of a suitable hangar at really quite a competitive price in the airport precinct. And once rehoused, the restoration can continue and hopefully successfully get us a magnificent DC2 memorial to the Ivor. And I commend this report to Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. There are no debate speakers for or against. Did you wish to close debate?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 13.10, the Albury Corporate Performance Reporting Progress Update. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A receive a note the Albury City Corporate Performance Reporting Progress Update, B, endorse the 6 corporate success pillars, and C, receive a further report on finalisation of performance measures.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. I've got a speaker who wishes to ask a question. Councillor Vanderman, you comfortable with that?
No problem.
Councillor King.
Yes, I've got a question regarding the progress of the public toilet strategy. When I first came to council 3 years ago, that was on the agenda. And
is this the right report, or you're referencing?
Item 20, I think it was, on the. Pretty sure it was.
That's a service and efficiency review.
Sorry, I'll retract that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Vandervan, did you wish to open debate?
No, look, no, Mr Mayor, it's a fairly straightforward report. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy to put the motion. There are no further speakers. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 13.11, the draft amendment to the Albury Development Control Plan 2010, Albury Airport updated noise impact provisions and consideration of provisions. Thank you. Submissions. Councillors. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you. Through you to move the recommendation as a motion that Council note and receive the submissions. B, adopt the draft updated Albury Airport noise impact provisions of Part 18. Albury Airport to the Albury Development Control Plan 2010 as amended, and undertake those actions required under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act 1979 and Environmental Planning and Assessment Regulation 2000 to have the draft updated Albury Airport and eyes impact provisions commenced.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion.
Councillor Gluck, do you wish to speak to that?
Very briefly, I think it was important to note that some effort was taken by the, can't think of the name of the organisation, Air Services Australia, I think it is, who submitted the suggestions for the changes. And it is interesting to note that all of those changes have been taken on board, which is fantastic. So thank you.
Thank you. There are no further speakers for or against. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Division, thanks. Councillor Stutchby, Councillor Doxey, Councillor Mack, Councillor King, Councillor Glack and Councillor Thurley and Councillor Vandervan. The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. 13.12, the Albury Tigers Football Club and Netball request for financial assistance to upgrade sports field lighting. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council A endorse an increase to the 2019-2020 Community Fund Program to include an allocation of $50,000 towards the Albury Sports Ground Lighting Project, and B, make the necessary funding adjustments as outlined within the report as part of the September quarterly budget review.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Very happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Thurley, do you wish to speak to that?
Briefly, another good result in terms of partnership between user groups and outside agencies. So the AFL has committed $50,000 to this project. The group themselves have contributed a significant sum of money, and council's making up the difference. This follows on from a lot of the success we've had with things like the Ranner Road Oval, JC King Netball Park, and they are to be commended on their initiatives here.
Thank you. There are no further speakers for or against. I'm happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Officers' reports for noting 14.1, the monthly development statistics, July 2019. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Stutchbury.
Mr Mayor, I would like to move that council receive and note the information in the monthly development statistics report for July 2019.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury, do you wish to open debate?
Regretfully, no.
There no further debate or questions. Happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 14.2, Service and Efficiency Review Program 6 monthly update. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that council receive and note the 6-month Service and Efficiency Review Program progress report.
Thank you. I need a seconder, thanks. Councillor Glacken.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley, did you wish to open debate?
You had a question?
Yes, I do have one.
You can take the question.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Councillor King.
Right, well, this might be the one. Item 20, the public toilet strategy. I said when I came to council 3 years ago, this was on the agenda then, and I note in the report that it's 70% complete. Can we get a bit of an update of when this is going to be finalised? Because the public toilets of Albury are a bit of a shambles from what I see. I think it's a health indicator of the health of the city if our public conveniences are clean, tidy, modern and functional. So it'd be good if we can get a good update on that.
Miss Squire? Mr Ferris. Oh, I don't know. I think they fit.
Mr Mayor, well, I'll have to take that on notice. We'll get you an update this week on the status of it.
Thank you, Mr Ferris. Councillor King, you comfortable with that?
I'd just like to point out the 3-year comment that I made as well on that.
Thank you. Noted. Councillor Thurley, did you wish to speak to that item?
Mr Mayor, I think this is a good example of council staff working to build on the things we have and build on the efficiency. We've not just sat back and seen that we've got all these things happening. We're reviewing how well they work, how we can change the way they work. and I think it's an important matter to keep under surveillance. I agree with Councillor King that we need to push some of these along a bit harder, but overall I think this is a great initiative, Council staff.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. And on that note, I do agree. I think 3 months or 3 years is far too long, and disability access is a premium, and it's something we take seriously. So happy to put that motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. 14.3 investment balances. Councillor Vanderman.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move the council receive and note the investment balances report for the month of July 2019.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley.
I'll second the motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. I have 2 questions, Councillor Vanderman. You happy for me to take them?
Go.
Councillor King's first question.
First question is that I noticed there's no money in the Bendigo Bank, which coincidentally has notified customers that it's going to close the doors out at Lavington. Can the member of staff give me some indication why we haven't supported one of our local institutions?
Mr Finlayson.
Thank you for the question, through you, Mr Mayor. The reason would be that the rates offered haven't been competitive compared to other institutions. Previously, AlburyCity has been a strong supporter of the Bendigo Bank, but for a period of time their rates haven't been up to the mark.
Comfortable with that?
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchby, question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Through you to the most relevant member of staff. With central bank interest rates around the world approaching or even going below zero, and our own Reserve Bank interest rates likely to continue to reduce, approaching zero, income from investments are likely in the future to reduce. Do we have, or are we required to have any strategies to offset potential reductions in interest earnings in the intermediate to long term?
Mr Finlayson.
Thank you for the question, through Mr Mayor. We'll need to reassess our interest income budget for both the current year and future budgets, so we'll commence doing that as part of the September quarter budget review. If that has a negative impact, which most likely will, on our operating result, we'll need to identify strategies to improve our overall operating result. But with respect to investment balances, the funds that are held are for a purpose, particularly forward infrastructure budgets, but not held specifically for the purpose of interest only. Thank you.
Councillor Stutchby, comfortable with that?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan, you wish to ask a question before you open the debate?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a quick one around the issue that I raised, I think it was at the last council meeting with, because of the low rates of interest, that we bring forward some projects around renewable energy. When might we expect some information with regard to the progress of that investigation?
Mr Zachnich.
Yes, so thanks for the question, through Mr Mayor. We indicated at the September quarter budget review, together with what council may wish to spend or allocate funds from the CDO realisation, what projects there might be there to allocate those funds to. So they'll be as part of the September quarter budget review, which will be to you in October.
Did you wish to open debate, Councillor Vandervan?
No, it's a fairly straightforward report. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. On that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. We have the AlburyCity Operational Plan 6 Monthly Progress Update 2019. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Thurley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I move that Council receive and note the AlburyCity Operational Plan 6 Monthly Progress Report for June 2019.
Thank you. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Thurley, you wish to speak to that at all?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
There being no question or debate, happy to put the motion. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. CM15, there are no delegates' reports for noting. Does anyone have any urgent business, councillors? I've not been made aware of any. Okay, as previously flagged, I will now consider, which was CM 13.5, the Edamega Sewerage Augmentation Contract. Thank you, councillors. Could I have a mover, please? Councillor Vanderman.
I'll have a slightly different wording to this one. Mr Mayor, I'll just have to flick back through 100 and something pages to find the right report. It depends on whether, I think, Mr Mayor, doesn't it, that whether some of the issues will come up for debate. I'm happy to move that we go into confidential. Can't do that? Okay. Thank you.
The current report that we have in front of us is for
Is open
consumption
debate.
by
Yep,
public
that's fine.
debate.
There's no problem. Thank you. Well, I'm getting there.
No, you're right.
There's a lot of really. Okay, well, I'm nearly there. Not. Oh, yes, I am. Okay, so I move that council accepts a tender from Longford Civil for contract number 17/01474, Edamega Sewerage Augmentation for the lump sum amount of $5,066,171.77,
Thank you, councillor.
including GST.
Thank you. I'll just wait for that to be included. Thank you, Robin. And we have a seconder, Councillor Stutchbury.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'm very pleased to second that motion, which was amended.
Thank you. Councillor Vandervan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've had some long discussions with staff members regarding this and their concerns with this particular report and why they recommended Armstrong's in the first instance. But I'm really concerned that we're not giving enough weighting to the local content of this. Now, understanding that from my discussions with council staff that approximately $2 million of this project has to be done by companies that have the expertise, but they're all outside of our area. So Armstrong's was one of the companies that does have the expertise to do the micro tunnelling that nobody in this area has the expertise to do. And there are some questions around the financial capacity of some of the contracts. So I would like to speak to the financial capacity of some of the contractors. So I would move, Mr Mayor, that we go into confidential. Can I have that documentation too?
For sure.
Thank you. I would like to move into closed session for the reason that the information it would have disclosed confer a commercial advantage on the person with whom the council is conducting or proposes to conduct business.
Thank you. I need a seconder, thanks. Councillor Stutchbury.
Second that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Is there anyone in the chamber that wishes to make any submissions in relation to why we shouldn't enter confidential on this item? Thank you. So I'm happy to put that. All those in favour? Anyone against? The motion is carried. We'll just wait for the chamber to be vacated. Councillor Vanderman? Yeah? We'll have a quick toilet break. Is that open, is it? Yeah.
motion's defeated, I would move that we go back to the original motion. Some comments were made, for example, that a DPAN, well, if these people tendered in good faith, they must have meant it. Well, I bet DPAN, when they tendered, thought they could do it. They didn't tender and thought, well, we're going to rort these people and cheat our subbies. We've been given a very, very complex and detailed report from staff, which talks about their engineering capacities, it talks about their capability in terms of workloads, and it talks about their financial capability. And we ask our staff to do this, given a significant failure of another contract. And now we're saying, oh, well, it doesn't matter, we'll go a different way and we'll award the contract to someone at a different price just because they are local. A fair bit of the work, if it's done by the Melbourne company, will still be done by local contractors, local people with local machines. They're not going to bring every machine they need here into town. We've been given a good assessment of why Armstrong Constructions Proprietary Limited should be the tenderer, and I would move that if this motion fails, I'll move that the original motion be put.
Thank you, Councillor Thurley. Speaker 4, Councillor Stutchbury.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I do indeed support this motion. I think that Councillor Van der Ven has been quite forensic in his analysis of this issue. To not that it's my position to, but to answer Councillor Glacken's query about perhaps giving it to Alpine because they're cheaper, I think the issue here is the boring capacity of the companies. Alpine apparently have the boring equipment but no expertise. Armstrong have both the equipment and the expertise but are not local. Longford have submitted in their tender that they will employ a subcontractor to do the boring that's necessary for the job. So all in all, for a small amount of extra expenditure, the local content of the work is in our favour, and additionally the profits presumably remain local as well. So I think this is a good motion and I support it.
Thank you, Councillor Stutchbury. Speaker against, Councillor Glacken.
Thank you. Yes, Mr Mayor. I speak against this because I have already asked and had it confirmed that this process has been in accordance with Council's process for tendering. So the assessment has been based on Council's system. We should not, and I thought we had learnt our lessons, that we should not meddle with the process. If the appropriate process is completed, we have greater confidence in the awarding of our tenders. And to suddenly circumvent that process calls all sorts of things into question. So, in essence, why do we have a tendering process, and why do our staff make the assessments on our behalf? We should just do it ourselves. I think if we are suggesting that we need to award it to, and Councillor Stutchbury has touched on this slightly, but if we're looking at increasing the local component, then there are other tenderers who have a higher local component. They're less expensive, and if we're not going to adhere to the table and the information collected by our staff for us, then we should just award it to one of the other tenderers, and I'd suggest we should award it to Alpine Plumbing. And I cannot support this arbitrary suggestion that we change to a different tenderer, award the contract to another tenderer other than the one that was assessed by our staff in this situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Glacken. Speaker 4, Councillor King.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm speaking for the for the motion of Councillor Vandervan. I recall a tender, and I could be corrected, that I think it was the roundabout at Thaguna Drive out in front of the Jayco business, where the prices were very close, and I think it was the figure of about 2 or 3%, and the staff noted that that was deemed to be equal. So I'm taking that on board, that these prices, you know, such a big figure, in my mind, are basically deemed to be equal. Now, I've also noted that Longford Civil, and there's been references made to DPAN all along this path. DPAN didn't do any work for the council previously. DPAN didn't have a relationship with council staff. DPAN, Longford Civil have done work for council. They have finished the work. It's been successful, from what I understand, and this is probably a natural progression for them to go into a different tier of their work. And again, we have a local government procurement policy that we brought into place at the start of this council, and I really think we should be adopting it and fully support Councillor Vandervan's motion.
Thank you. I have a speaker against, Councillor Doxey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Whilst I understand Councillor Vandervan's issues in relation to supporting local, looking at our notes, you'll see they've already, Longford Civil got a leg up with 8. They can't complete the entire job themselves. And I think Councillor Thurley and Councillor Glacken covered all the salient points in relation to why we should revert to the original staff recommendation. Original staff recommendation. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Doxey. We have no further speakers for or against. Councillor Vandervan, did you wish to close debate?
Yeah, look, thank you, Mr Mayor. I think Councillor King sort of summed it up. I think from all of the aspects that Longford Civil have worked successfully with council on a number of projects, have a good working relationship with them, that they're fully local, even though that some of the parts of the contract have to be sourced from another area, which appears that Armstrong Civil can do as far as their capacity is concerned. But for all of those reasons and the fact that there's only less than 2% difference in the contract price, I hope that we can see that the benefit to Albury and the community is much greater with going for Longford Civil than with Armstrong. So I hope that we can get a result with this particular motion. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Vandervan. On that note, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. We have a confidential item, and I'll ask councillor if they can move into confidential. Councillor Thurley.
Also moved, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Doxey.
Happy to second, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Thurley. flooding the gallery. Yep. Okay, we're now back in open council. Thank you, councillors. I need to recommit the motion as put by Councillor Thurley and seconded by Councillor Stutchbury. The council delegate the Chief Executive Officer to negotiate an outcome consistent with option 1 in regard to the Land Environment Court proceedings in Namity Proprietary Limited versus AlburyCity Council. The motion was moved and successfully held and carried. So thank you, councillors. Just to finish proceedings on a sombre note, I wish to acknowledge the former member for Farrer, Mr. Tim Farrer, Vale Tim Farrer, and send our regards. Tim Fisher, sorry, Tim Farrer. I'm tired. He's here. Tim Fisher, and send our regards and condolences to his family, Judy Brewer, sons Harrison and Dominic. So, thank you again, councillors, and the council is finished.
Are interested? So expect final details to come out tomorrow, but the funeral itself will be